welcome. Today's guest is an author, world-renowned mind-body healing expert, sought-after international and TEDx speaker, and host of the award-winning podcast, Heal Yourself, Change Your Life, where she takes live callers and helps them get radical healing results in just minutes using their own mind. After suffering a devastating injury that left her using a wheelchair, walker, and cane for over 6 years, she began her own journey of discovery and healing. Fully healing herself using the power of her mind, she has dedicated her life to helping others do the same. Please welcome Dr. Brandy Gillmore. Welcome, Brandy. It's so great to have you with us here today.
Likewise, it is so wonderful to be here, and I love what you're doing with the show. It's beautiful, and so it's an honor to be here with you.
Well, thank you. We cannot wait to hear all about the amazing work that you're doing, and it's so fascinating. So you were in a wheelchair and a walker and a cane for 6 years. You had these difficulties. What happened with that?
The reality of it is literally the last place that I ever thought I would be. And basically, I had an accident, and technically two. I had both a car accident and then a fall. And basically, I fell just wrong, just right, however you want to say it. But I went from living this full life, doing network engineering, operations, enjoying life, to being mostly in bed, even just on morphine in extreme pain, and using a wheelchair or walker or cane to get around. But movement was just limited. On a good day, I could get out with my walker or wheelchair. And on a bad day, I didn't make it out of bed. And I was just in so much pain. And basically that my doctor said that there was nothing they could do for me. And that's where I was for years.
So when they told you that, when the doctors said there was nothing they could do, what kept you going?
Well, honestly, initially, was just, you had to, you had to keep going. It was just kind of each day. And to be honest, I went to some pretty dark places, but then I started, it was kind of like this thought in the back of my head that growing up, my stepfather had always said, if somebody else can't do it, you're going to have to just do it yourself. And it was like, all right, it just was like, all right, I'm going to have to figure this out. And the interesting thing is when I started researching and looking around at what was really going on with healthcare, what I began to realize is that there are a lot of people that aren't getting better. There's something like 1.5 billion people who live with chronic pain. And I thought, well, wait a second here. There's all kinds of ailments or autoimmune or all of these things. And so I started looking outside of the box. And the more that I did, the more I realized that we were missing something in the way that we even look at our health. And even by looking at things in a different way, I started going, well, wait a second here. There is hope that I could get better. And hope is what kept me going, I would say.
So how did you harness the power of your hope and the power of that determination of that child who went back to hearing her father say, well, if they tell you you can't do it or it can't be done, you're going to have to figure it out. How did you harness that power to take the steps necessary to learn what you needed to learn to heal yourself?
Yeah, I think it was an unfoldment. Basically, I was starting to look outside of the box, and I did all of the things where I did like diet and supplements, and then when that didn't work, I was, doing fasting and cleanses and eating all the greens. And I even got to the point where I was like ordering like special water from the Amazon. I was willing to do anything. And I was also looking for any medical procedures, like cutting edge medical procedures. That's what I was hoping, is that something would be discovered and that I would get my life back. And basically what happened is then my doctors, I had been going to this hospital where I would go in and 2, 3, 4, 5 doctors would come into the room and assess me and try to figure out a plan. So I was working with teams of doctors because I couldn't give up. I was in so much pain that I couldn't live my life like that. And so what happened ultimately is this hospital where I had been going to get like nerve ablations, infusions, injections, all of these things regularly, which weren't really helping, but I was trying anything. But basically they called me up and they said there was a trial study for a brand new procedure and that I could be a part of it. And I thought, oh my God, like I'm going to get my life back. And so like, I remember counting down the days to this study and thinking, everything that I was going to do and who I wanted to go see after I got better. And I was just so excited. And even on the day I went to go into the hospital, I remember actually even carrying what I wore, which I hadn't done in like years. And so they wheeled me in my wheelchair into the hospital and they got me on the gurney and were getting me all prepped for the procedure. And so I was laying, just laying in the hospital bed thinking about everything. And then the doctor came in for this medical study and he came in and he said, Miss Gilmore, we've re-reviewed your chart and we actually don't expect you to get better. You can't be a part of the study.
Wow. Take us
Yeah.
through what happened what went through your mind, and when you are there, you are actually there, and now they pull the rug out from under you.
Well, the truth is, I became a little bit of a Karen, I think the term is. And I was like, but you told me. And no offense to any Karens. My grandmother's name is actually Karen. But so I like the name. But that feeling of let me talk to your manager. I was so upset. It's like when you have that, I felt like I had swallowed a softball. I was choking back tears and it was like my only chance to get my life back. And technically what they ended up doing is they said, we'll actually give you the procedure. We'll actually do it for you, but not as part of the study because you'll ruin the results because we don't expect you to get better. And so technically that's what ended up unfolding. But either way, it was just, when I left there, I was, it didn't end up working, but I was just so stressed and so upset about everything and how it unfolded. And the next memory I do have is I was laying in my same bed at home and I woke up, but I didn't even want to open my eyes. I was just, it didn't work. I was in all of this pain still, which just felt like razor blades and pain and this is so burning pain throughout my body. And so I was just laying there. And the only thought in my mind was, I don't want to live. Like, I can't do this. What is the point? I can't live my life like this. And in that moment, it was like this thought or this voice came into my head. It was like, but Brandy, what about the placebo? And I was like, wait a second, leading up to this study, I remember thinking, please don't get the placebo. Please don't get the placebo. I want the real treatment. And that's because anytime you go into a medical study, you could get either. You could get the placebo or the real treatment. And in that moment, as I was laying there, not wanting to live, I thought, wait a second. What about the placebo? It's a known fact that a certain percentage of people can get healing type results, even in the body, with just a placebo. And in that moment, I thought, well, wait a second. If there's something in the mind that could actually heal my body, then I need to figure out what it is. And in that moment, I couldn't give up. That hope came back. And so that's what kept me going, was that hope. And then the more I started researching, I found research that was just mind-blowing. And not beyond the placebo. And I was like, wait a second here. We are majorly overlooking something. And it was pivotal.
Amazing. So before your injury, you were like the world's biggest skeptic. And then here you are in bed and have this, oh, what about the placebo? And
Yeah.
that then sends you on this journey of exploration and discovery. So would you say that was the turning point? That was really what changed to take you from this skeptic to this, wait a minute, there is something here.
Absolutely. So that was one thing. Then also I started looking at like multiple personality disorder. And people can have actually different ailments when they're in different personalities. Like they could have asthma in one personality but not another, or allergies, or different body temperature, or pain, or there's even like a people that have shown up, like there's a person who was blind in one personality and not in another, and I was like, wait a second here. And that was part of it. Then another thing was, looking at it's something like, and studies say different amounts, but over 80-90% of amputees still experience pain. And I was like, well, wait a second, they don't even have a limb. But that multiple personality disorder, or now it's called DID, dissociative identity disorder, the fact that we could have different that people can have different ailments when they're in different personalities, I was like, wait a second, there's something going on that we're not looking at. And that was pivotal. It was like there's something in the mind. And then there was another thing. I was like, well, wait a second. You know, Science even says that our bodies are constantly repairing and replacing cells. It's even estimated that we have a whole new skeleton in approximately 10 years, and depending upon what research you read. But point being is that the thing that everybody seems to agree on is that the majority of the physical body is continuing to repair and replace cells, and even blood cells. I mean, live 90 to 120 days. And I thought, well, how is it possible then for somebody to have a blood disorder that's going if they're constantly replacing cells? And so I thought, that's not possible. Or how is it possible for somebody to have that old football injury from high school?
Mhm.
Body's constantly repairing cells. And then that's when I was like, well, wait a second. While the majority of the physical body is constantly repairing and replacing cells, the brain is not. I mean, not like the physical body is. And so that's when I started looking even more at the brain. And yes, I was world's biggest skeptic, but that medical research of actually looking at the placebo and looking at MPD and seeing that was something, was helped me to really look outside the box further and further.
So, what did you discover?
This is what I discovered was I was trying to, figure out the placebo or MP, like all of these things. And I was like, I need to simplify this. And that's one of the things that I used to do when I did network engineering and operations. And the reason that I was so good at it is I would just simplify everything and kind of just build on it. And so what I started doing is I started looking at, okay, how can we see that the mind impacts the physical body? And I thought, well, emotions, even an emoji knows that, where you see the smiling face of an emoji embarrassed, because we know that the emotion of embarrassed can create a red face. Or even, sexual thought, sexual physical response. We can see that emotion, or even anxiety, racing heart, shortness of breath. So we can see that the heart, like the whole body, can be impacted by that emotion. And I thought, yeah, we know that, how much can emotions really affect the physical body? And then I started looking at things like the widowhood effect, where a senior who loses a spouse can actually die, or broken heart syndrome, or even things like bored to death or scared to death. And prior to my injury and all this stuff, I thought it was just a figure of speech. If somebody says, oh, I was bored to death, or, oh my God, I was so scared to death. But research has actually shown that somebody can be so scared that their heart stops, or boredom has been linked to higher death and whatnot. And so what I started looking at is these emotions in the subconscious mind. And I thought, well, if our emotions can even impact us to the point of death, then what are we doing? And now what was really also very insightful was that, world's biggest skeptic, and I always look at things objectively. And I said, well, I can see, we all know that stress affects the physical body. I mean, that was even shown in the 70s with psychoneuroimmunology, that stress could affect the immune system. So we've known that, we can see that. And let's be honest, we can also see people who are in the military or officers who are stressed, but they're not sick. And seniors or people who are retired, who have a more leisure life, who are sick. And so what I started looking at is, why is that? And of course, part of it had to do with what was in their subconscious mind. So that was part of it. The other thing that I figured out was that it's like it takes multiple ingredients, if you will. And the easiest way to illustrate this is, if you think about, if somebody wants to make a cake, and they have flour, they can't make a cake. But if you have flour and you mix it with eggs and butter and et cetera, or vegan eggs and butter, whatnot, et cetera, but you mix it with ingredients, then you can make a cake. And so what I figured out with the mind was the exact same thing, is that when you add a certain combination of emotions in the subconscious mind, that's what's linked up to the illness. And so ultimately what I did was really start looking at it in that way. And that was a huge breakthrough for me. And then another piece that I kind of started looking at was kind of like on an energy note. When I started looking at the awareness that when neurons fire, it's shown that biophotons are released, right? And I don't want to get too technical, but let's just say that, if you think about photons, biophotons, what I started looking at is understanding and building a hypothesis on how that energy from our mind and our thoughts and our emotions could impact the body. And that's what was really pivotal to me, was looking at the correlation between emotions and how they affect our body and our thoughts, and really expanding from there.
So, when you started noticing the connections and the correlations, and you started putting the pieces of the puzzle together, how did you take that information and turn it into the techniques that then you were able to use on yourself?
Well, that was a process too. To be honest, initially I was trying like affirmations and meditations and binaural beats and frequencies and recordings and phantom phase frequencies and all of these things. But after years of doing that and it not working, I started to think, okay, well, I've got to do this in a different way. And so ultimately, I started to get clarity as to why meditation can show some positive effects, but it's never really going to get you where you want to go. And so I started really just looking at the mind and emotions in a different way. And I would say that, one of the things that our culture does is you hear things like stress management or anger management, or when people have certain emotions, what do? They tend to talk about them. Now, ultimately, that isn't enough to get results. Like, for somebody to get real results with healing, and this is what I had to do, was I had to really actually change the emotion so it was gone. So in other words, anger management, when you stop and think about it, yes, a person's behavior may improve, so they might go from being angry and punching a hole in the wall to being angry and going for a walk. But either way, if that emotion is still there, then it doesn't make the real change. And so it really took understanding emotions in a different way and starting to look at the awareness that they really needed to change. And I needed to do something beyond affirmations, beyond meditation, beyond all of that, and really start targeting specific emotions.
So, how did you begin to target your specific emotions, and which one did you start with?
Uh, you know, because I didn't know what was impacting me, it took me a while. Interestingly, I mean, this is the last thing that I would have ever thought that was bothering me, uh, but it actually had to do with 9/11, the events that unfolded in September 11th. And so, I mentioned that prior to my injury, I did network engineering and operations, and I worked here in California, and my schedule was 5 a.m. to 2 p.m., which meant most of the time that I was working, especially the early mornings at 5 a.m., I was working with my counterparts on the East Coast, and they were in the trade towers. And so, basically, what happened is that I was on the phone with a bunch of them when the everything happened with 9/11. And so ultimately, and I don't want to share too much negativity stuff, but either way, there was a lot that was going on where people were, saying, help me, all of these things. And I was watching it because where we worked in technology, in telecommunications, I always had to know current events. And so where my desk was, I was surrounded by TVs. Like I had a TV on every single pillar around me. And so not only did I have all of this peripheral data and I was watching the planes, but I was also talking to my coworkers that I loved on the phone. And so that was, again, the last thing that I would have thought was affecting me, because I wasn't concerned about myself. I was concerned about them. But what I didn't realize is I had buried some emotions in there. And so that's what
there's a lot in that. There's a lot in that with the external stimuli, right? The news, the visual stimuli, watching it, the auditory.
Yeah, not only that, but then you remember after that happened, how it was like we're in orange or red or in, because part of me burying it was also I was working and I'm hearing we're in orange, we're in red, and so it's all so with all of those TVs surrounding, and then that and the thing of it is I have always been this strong being who would have fought for any one of those coworkers to go running, and I would have been there and wanted to be there for them. And so the last thing that I would have thought was that it was anything to do with that. It was more so. But yeah, it all showed up in my subconscious mind. So that's ultimately what I ended up. Basically, the feeling, because that's an experience.
Yeah.
So the feeling underneath was an expectation that I was going to die, but burying part of what was creating that was, I was focused on my work and doing my work. And so all of the TVs going, we're in orange, we're in red, we're blah, blah, blah. And so all of that was just getting buried in my subconscious mind. And, I now realize that everything happens for a reason. And I would say my accident was about, I don't know, like 9 months later. Maybe it was more like a year later, somewhere in there. I try not to give anything a specific date in my mind, because I don't want to keep it. So, but yeah, so absolutely.
Wow, that is a pivotal moment for sure. And there is a lot that we could unpack there.
There's so much.
Wow, there's a lot that we could unpack.
There's so much. But the biggest thing is from that is that things get buried in the subconscious mind that we don't even realize are there. And so it took me to even, number one, even understand my subconscious mind, because I had been somebody that was like, let me just always plow through. I have a very strong mother. That's how you do life, was that. And so that was pivotal also.
Yeah. Now, for the audience saying, well, of course that was pivotal, and of course that was really indelibly, marked on your subconscious. And well, of course, I mean, that was so incredibly traumatic. Of course it had an effect. My life is nothing like that. What would you say to people who think that only these quote unquote major traumas or these major events can get stuck in their subconscious?
I would say that notice one of the things that I mentioned was it comes down to the emotion, to where I was like, yeah, there was that event, but what was the emotion? And that's the way you want to think about it. Because I mean, I have worked with, like, for example, a guy who didn't cheat on his wife, but was having thoughts about it and was feeling so guilty about it that it was creating a bunch of pain in his body. And that was another thing. And I would also say, by the way, to get excited. And this is the reason why, is because, when we stop and look at it, our thoughts help create our life. And we can look at it in a very grounded way. If you think about, maybe you've heard in psychology, where unfortunately a woman can have an abusive father and then get away from him and find an abusive boyfriend, boss, spouse, et cetera, like that pattern, unfortunately, continues. She'll attract the same person. And It doesn't happen in every situation. Of course, it depends on how that information goes in the brain. But point being is that our thoughts help create our life. And if you want to look at, you could even look at Einstein. Imagination is the preview of life's coming attraction. Or we could look at the Bible. Mark 11:24 says, whatever you ask for in prayer, believe you have received and it's yours. So we can look at metaphysics, quantum physics, the Bible, whatever way you want to look at it. Our thoughts help create our lives. And what's beautiful and exciting about healing is exactly this, is that I set out to heal myself. I was in all of this pain. My life, I was at a point, it was horrible. And so I worked with my subconscious mind and shifted this emotional pattern out. And it changed my life in many different ways. And the way that I look at with health is it's like this, is that it's like a check engine light, if you will. It's like whatever emotion an emotional pattern somebody has, when you change it, you change your health, but you also change your life. And so it's beautiful. I mean, imagine for a moment, like a person that I've worked with. I worked with this beautiful woman who was criticizing herself, and she had such self-criticism, and it was affecting her health. So she had all kinds of pain and different things going on. Now, when I worked with her and then helped her to shift that self-criticism, a couple of things happened. First and foremost, she released her pain. So her pain healed. It hasn't been back. Just beautiful. And not only that, but what also happened is, imagine her life without self-criticism. She learned to love herself. Her level of happiness, of love, of joy, of self-love, of success, all of that went up exponentially. And she literally went from being in a really struggling in life, in a lot of issues and debt and blah, 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 and all these things, to now feeling like on top of the world and crazy in love with her husband. I mean, it's just really, really beautiful. Crazy in love with her husband, great friends. I mean, it just transformational. And so what I would say to somebody, to your question, is I would say, get excited. And that it doesn't have to be some major trauma. In fact, a lot of times it's not some major trauma. The example of the guy who didn't even cheat on his wife, but was even thinking about it, created an emotion inside of him. So just like if you think about somebody being embarrassed, they can feel embarrassed over nothing, and yet their face can still turn red. And so it's not about what happens. It's about the way you really feel. And so if you think about my life, nothing actually happened to me. There was TVs getting sensory information in my brain, and I experienced emotions from that I buried in my subconscious. And so I would say the biggest thing is think in terms of emotional patterns. Think in terms of what is the gift when you really change that? How does it change your life? I had no idea it would change my life so much, but literally every area of my life changed in a most beautiful way. And so there's that. And think in terms of emotional patterns, not events, because all the time people think, okay, well, what is this trauma? And I've literally, by the way, worked with people before who have wanted to heal themselves, and they've literally dug up every single trauma. They're like, I had a trauma when I was 20, and I had a trauma when I was 19, and then 8. And they're like literally going backwards because they're inundating themselves with every negative thing that ever happened in their life. You don't want to do that. Your goal should be to lift, to feel even more positive, to step into even more happiness and joy, and create that emotional shift. Meanwhile, letting go of negative patterns and negative emotions from the subconscious mind.
I love that. So focus on the emotion, not the event. Focus on the emotional patterns, not the trauma or the circumstances. I think that is a really powerful tool that the audience can implement right away.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that check engine light, and use the emotions. I love that. So powerful.
Absolutely, it is. And can I build on that for a second? Just because I think you're spot on about, and I love what you said. It is a powerful tool, and it is a powerful awareness. And I love that you extracted that. I absolutely agree. And so something that you'll want to keep in mind, and this is a a sticking point for a lot of people is that our emotions control our consciousness. And if I simplify this, you want to think about it kind of like this, is that if you've if you know, with people, if you think about somebody who's crazy in love with somebody, what do they see? They see, of course, all of the good things, right? You've done that before in your life where you just see all of those wonderful things. And then on the opposite side, if you're pissed off at them, if you're upset with them, if you're angry with them, any of those upset emotions, what do you see in that person? You see, of course, the negative in
All
them.
the bad.
And so, right? And what happens is sometimes people will be there and they're trying to shift a relationship. And they go, well, let me just think about what I love about the person. Let me think about what's positive. But they're thinking and not feeling. And so they're like, well, at least the person didn't screw anything up today. You know, it's not really genuine. But if you think in terms of feeling and you really shift your feeling, then you also, it becomes easier to create that real shift when you just think in terms of emotion. So that's something else that the audience can definitely start, building on and using.
Absolutely. So focus on the emotions. Now, I am sure beyond some of the things we've already covered, I'm sure there are so many misconceptions that people have about healing with the mind. So, what are some others? Talk to us more about that.
Absolutely. I would say one big one is first and foremost is a lot of people think, okay, well, if I'm going to heal, then I need to believe that I'm already healed. Like I need to believe that. And I did that, by the way, personally, and it didn't go very well. And this is what you'll want to remember is a lot of people think that the placebo works because people believe that it'll work. But there's something called the open label placebo. And what that is it's where both the doctor and the patient both know it's a fake pill and it still has been shown to get healing results. So it's not all about belief. There's more to it. And so, but I just see people all the time doing that. And again, I did that. It backfired. It didn't work very well. So there's that, or even affirmations. Like people will think, oh, all I have to do is do affirmations and affirmations. But let's be honest. If, a lot of times people can love somebody and also hold underlying resentments towards them. And so we can have mixed emotions. Just because we feel one way doesn't mean we don't feel another. We could love our mom and then feel hurt or angry towards her and underneath, or a spouse or whomever or whatnot. So a lot of times people think all I have to do is do affirmations to change. And that's not it either. And I would just say, or gratitude. Another one I hear so often is people saying, well, I just need to feel grateful. But what I've seen happen, unfortunately, a lot, and don't get me wrong, gratitude is a good thing. But what I see all the time is people will have underlying feelings of guilt. And I even did this exercise with a group of people recently. I was leading a class and I asked people, what would it feel like if somebody just, made you your favorite dinner? And a lot of people said, oh, it'd feel sweet. It would feel loving. Some people said it would feel guilty. I would feel undeserving. I would feel like it wasn't fair. Now, if you think about it for a moment, if somebody is going, oh, I just feel so grateful I'm so grateful, and they feel undeserving or unworthy or guilty or like they should be in self-sacrifice or any of those, technically, that can backfire. Because if somebody's saying, oh, I'm so grateful for everything in life, and they feel guilty for receiving, guilt goes up, and the issues get worse. And so, though a lot of times that's what I'm seeing people are just trying to put a Band-Aid on it. And the thing to really emphasize is, I know we talked about in the beginning where I've been able to show people how to get results even in minutes under thermal medical equipment and live changes. And the thing that it really, really takes is it takes beyond that. It takes really creating a real transformation in the subconscious mind. So when you make a real transformation, you bring in something new, you get rid of the old, and you really embody that change. And then you have to get it in your subconscious mind. And so even when I work with people, I'm emphasize to them, you have to get this in your subconscious mind to create a real change. And
So
does
how
it
did
take
someone do that? To someone listening, and in our audience, and they say, well, that sounds great. I've done the affirmation thing. I've done the gratitude thing. I've I've monitored my thoughts. I've done the things that you're talking about. I've meditated, and it hasn't worked. And now you're saying really lean into my emotions and make these shifts, and then put it in my subconscious mind. How do I do that? So what is something that they can do to take that first step?
Absolutely. One of the things that I did and people love all of the time is I call it mind programming with music. And, to give you some examples of what I did during my injury is I started thinking, okay, well, if I really have to start shifting my emotions and I need to create this change, I started listening to songs and purposely bringing in the feeling as much as I can. So one of the songs I listened to was like U2, It's a Beautiful Day.
Yeah.
And I would bring in the feeling of It's a Beautiful Day. Now I got to tell you, when I started listening to that song, I did not feel like it was a beautiful day. I mean, the whole world fell apart. I was in extreme pain and I didn't know if I even had a future. And so, but I started purposely just melting into that feeling as much as I could. Or another one was My Wish for You by Rascal Flats. And it was just this feeling where it's like, my wish for you is that this life becomes all that you want it to. And I would think about that song and I would kind of just send that thought towards my family and friends and then everybody in the world. And then to myself as well, just kind of feeling that feeling. Or another one was Walking on Sunshine by Katrina and the Waves. And I would, who thinks about this, right? You're laying in bed, that's right, laying in bed in extreme pain on a handful of medication, everything from morphine to Neurontin to Norco to, I mean, all kinds of things, Vioxx at one point, Naprosyn. I mean, I was on so many different medications and sitting there taking in, Walking on Sunshine, It's Gonna Feel Good by Katrina and the Waves. And so it was just, walking is gonna feel good. I was just motivated to just do it and be it. And so it helped me lift. And so that's what I recommend to people is it's not about picking the song that's your favorite song or just listening to a happy playlist. While that's great, it's about listening to something that makes you feel something on purpose. And notice the songs that I was listening to wouldn't have been my initial go-to. It was like, okay, what emotion do I need to start getting in?
Yeah.
And let me start nurturing and bringing that in. So that was something that I found the easiest to start doing, especially where I was, and any people of any level can do that.
Absolutely. So for people who are newer on their journey and they're saying, wait, how is music going to help me and all of that, I want to circle back to something that you touched on earlier and just kind of tie it together. And that is the biochemical reactions that happen with our emotions. So you mentioned when you feel fear, the heart rate can elevate and the breathing gets more shallow. You mentioned if you feel embarrassed, the cheeks get red. So there are these physiological reactions. We are a chemical factory that when we are in these emotions, which is energy and motion, right? Emotion, you talked about energy earlier. When we're in these emotions and they release these chemicals into our body, these chemicals into our brain, we have physiological reactions. And so I love that what you're saying is this is going to happen anyway. So be intentional and create the physiological reactions that you want. Create the experiences that lift you up. So pick in with intentionality, pick the songs that are going to release good chemicals in your body that are going to create uplifting, empowering emotions that are going to allow you to see the things that you want to have and heal the parts that you want to heal, and just all of the things that we are the system. You mentioned earlier also baking a cake, and that if you have the flour alone, nothing happens. But when you have the right combination, you get a cake. And so I love that you are giving the audience these different ingredients that they can use to put together in the right combination to bake their cake. So thank you so much for that. And you also mentioned that there are a lot of people who are stuck when it comes to self-healing. Why do you think that is? And how do you use your techniques to shift that?
Yeah, I would say that there are unfortunately a lot of people who are stuck with self-healing, and I would say a lot of it has to do with one, misconceptions, and another thing is exactly what you were just talking about. Is a lot of times people overlook the importance of the positive. So a lot of times people go, "I just want to get the stress gone. I just want to get the stress gone," and they're kind of chasing out the negativity, but there's a few things that happen when you bring in more of the positive. If you think about, positive endorphins. So endorphins are body's natural painkiller, if you will, and so it goes beyond just bringing in endorphins. Again, it goes back to that emotional pattern, but happiness makes it all easier to get yourself out of the hole, if you will. And I'll explain what I mean is if you think about very simple example, let's say somebody is drinking a glass of tea or whatnot, and they go to take a drink and they spill it on themselves. Now, if somebody's in a great mood, they might spill it and be like, "Oh my God, I must have a hole in my lip." Or they might say, "Oh my God, I'm 40 years old and I'm still learning how to drink," or whatever. They'll just kind of make a joke around about it or just clean it up or whatever. Now, on the flip side, if somebody's frustrated and angry and all of that, and they go to, they're having a hard day, they're overwhelmed, they're all these things, and then they go to take a drink and they spill it on themselves, they're like, "Oh my God, this is the freaking blah, 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 blah." It adds more fuel to everything that's going on. And then it's that more of that spiral. And so even if we can start lifting, there are endorphins, there are that biochemical response. And another thing, kind of to bring spirituality into this, when you stop and look at it, even the Bible, that's one of the things that I started, looking at. Where can I see all of this information as I was going through my injury beyond the placebo and MPD? And the Bible even states, a merry heart is a medicine to the body. Ill thoughts will dry the bones. So the Bible said like 3,000 years ago that basically stress impacts the body negatively and that positivity is good for the soul. It's good for our physical body. And so I would say one of those reasons that people are stuck is exactly building on what you just mentioned, was exactly that biochemical response is important.
Now, you mentioned that meditation is not enough. Talk to us a little bit more about that and maybe something that you would do instead.
Absolutely. I know that a lot of people and more people are tending towards meditation. And I would say it's a double-sided coin. So there is a part that can be beneficial, which is just getting in the feeling of relaxation. But typically, it's not going to get you where you want to go as far as healing. And not only that, but it can create it kind of can make things harder to identify in your mind. And I'm going to go ahead and do let's do a short little interactive exercise, and I'll show you what I mean by that so you can see for yourself, because I like for everybody to understand things. And I'm going to warn you ahead of time, this exercise is absolutely silly and ridiculous, and it is also extremely profound, which it won't seem like it at first, but just stick with me on the end. So here's the exercise. So I want to invite just everybody to go ahead and close your eyes. And of course, if you're driving, don't do that while listening. But other than that, I want to invite everybody to just close your eyes. And I want to invite you to just bring in the picture that somebody that you love is making you your favorite meal ever. Somebody you love is making you your favorite meal ever. I want you to think about the emotion of that, how that feels to you. how that really feels. And a lot of times when I'm teaching classes or whatnot, people will say something like, "I feel so loved," or "I feel cared about," or "I feel, just so honored or excited or in love," or, all different types of feelings. And sometimes, of course, some people will say, "Oh, I feel guilty," or "I feel like it's not fair," or undeserving. So sometimes that'll come up, but I just want you to notice what feeling comes up for you. And then I'm going to ask you to go ahead and set that aside completely. Set that aside completely. And we're going to go somewhere silly. And again, it's profound. Just come with me. So I'm going to ask you again to breathe. We set that other one aside completely. And I'm going to ask you to picture just for a moment that you have a big silver spoon in your hand. Silver spoon in your hand. It's a perfect silver spoon. And you take a big scoop of stinky doggy poo and you take it towards your mouth, up to your mouth to eat it. And what emotion comes up for you? And again, this is profound. So first and foremost, delete all of that. But what emotion comes up? Now, people will typically say, "Oh my God, disgusting, gag, I want to vomit," all of those things. Now, that is what's profound. And there's several things that are profound from this. And again, I know it is silly, but number one, when people say, "Oh my God, I felt like I wanted to vomit or gag," think about this for a moment. Number one, that's just from an imagined emotion in your head. You can see how your emotions can affect your physical body. That simple. Now, that's one thing. Now, number two is this, is that if you think about this emotion, part of the reason I use this is because nobody has thought about this. I'm sure anybody here hasn't thought about this, any of this in 10 years, more than that, right? If you've ever changed a baby's diaper, then it's like voodoo. Like you have to it's mad. You have to be able to keep their hands out of it because all the time they're moving their hands around. They'll try to get in their diaper. If you've ever seen a baby eat gross things and put it in their mouth, or even go to the bathroom in the bathtub and then want to play with it. I mean, there's all kinds of things. Like they don't have that. This is disgusting innately, but instead it's programmed into them. Then they go, "Ew, nasty, gross, disgusting." So they get that feeling programmed into them. Point being is that this programming has been in your subconscious mind since a very, very, very young age. Now, there's an emotion with it that can affect your body if you trigger it, and is programming from a very young age. Now, I can tell you, you could meditate for 500,000 hours if you want, but that feeling is not going to go away. It's programmed into your subconscious mind. And so the quote unquote good thing about meditation is it can help program in calmness, but for you to get radical results in your life, like imagine if that was a trauma or an emotional pattern from childhood. You can meditate and meditate and meditate, but it's not going to suddenly delete that. But the way to get radical results is to identify other things like a hurt or a wound or a pattern of criticism or a pattern of judgment and address those and really shift those. And that's when I see people get radical results and that's the way you want to do it. And I had been meditating for, 4 something years, at least 5 years, maybe all of the time, like hours every day. And it didn't work. And I see people who've been doing that 10, 20, 30, 40 years. And what I do is I help them to identify what are those specific things. And when they start looking at it in a different way and go, "Okay, well, what is that specific thing?" And then they change it, they get results in their health, in their life. And the other thing that I see with meditation, by the way, is also this, is that unfortunately, if you picture two people meditating next to each other and one person is, what thoughts come into their mind. Let's say each person, their thoughts come into their mind and they gently ignore them. Their thoughts come into their mind and they ignore them. Their thoughts come into their mind and they gently just brush them aside. Now, if you think about what they're doing, is they're training their brain to ignore what's in their subconscious mind. Whatever thought comes up for this person is different from this person. Now, ultimately, to get radical results, you want to instead be able to identify what's in your subconscious mind and then shift it and get rid of it. But what happens is people train themselves to not be able to see what's in their subconscious mind. And then it makes it harder to make those changes. And there's a couple of reasons that is. If you think about, if you've ever done this before, where maybe you've been driving a car and you're going to a place that you've been before many, many times, and you get to the destination. And when you get there, you go, oh my God, did I stop at all the lights? Because you realize your brain kind of went on autopilot for a moment. And so what happens is as people meditate every day, and this is what I'm experiencing over and over, they'll meditate every day where they're checking out or they're putting their brain here or there or just ignoring the thoughts. Their brain gets so good at this, it starts doing it automatically. So then automatically they're having a harder time seeing what's in the subconscious mind to shift it. And the way that you'll want to think about it for happiness, for health, whatever it is that you're really shifting what's in your subconscious mind. And the easiest way to really illustrate that is if you think about walking into, let's say you walk into your house and there's a bunch of radio stations playing. Some of them good, some of them you love, some of them you don't. They're negative. Now, ultimately, you don't want to walk into your house and say, oh my God, there's all this stuff. Let me just meditate. Let me just check out. Let me find my inner peace. Instead, what you want to do, you want to identify the radio stations that you don't like and shut them off. And the ones that you do like and create more that you do like. Then when you walk into your house, you're like, hey, like you're happy, you're alive, you're feeling good, you're enjoying life. And that's what you want to do of the house of your brain and your subconscious mind is you want to be able to really look at everything, to identify it, to shut off the negative, turn up the positive, and enjoy life. And
amazing. I love that. I love that. Just walk over to those radio stations you don't like, turn them off, turn up the ones you do, and live a life that you love. I love that. So powerful. So how can people get in touch with you? How can they get into your world? How can they learn more about what you do? How can they find you?
People can find me if you go to my website, brandygillmore.com. You can go there, or also I have a podcast, Heal Yourself, Change Your Life. And on it, I take people who are experiencing chronic pain or all kinds of issues and show them how to actually release it on air. So listeners can hear the difference, see the difference, see what's going on. The volunteer can actually experience that and see those changes. And also I have a book coming out in early 2023. And so I'm excited about that. And it's just going to be, sharing the tools, the techniques, the things that I did to really transform my health, my life. I'm very excited about that. So those are the best ways to really reach out and connect.
Amazing. So they can find out more about your podcast and more about your forthcoming book, I'm sure on your website. Maybe they can send you a message or get on a pre-order list, all the ways, because you definitely want to tune into her podcast. You want to get a copy of this book. So head to her website and register or pre-order. Because
yes, absolutely. And to pre-order, it is brandygillmore.com/pre-order. And so that is the link for it. So, or book also goes to that as well. But yeah, that is the link. And the podcast, it just, I mentioned that hope was the very thing that kept me going. And I know that so many people have listened to the podcast and said, oh my God, like it just, it's a breath of fresh air. It gives me hope. It helps me to understand it. It's expansive. And just even doing that can elevate your mindset, your happiness, your life, and start to help you even start on the process. So that's really powerful also. So
amazing. Go check it out. Check out her podcast. Check out her upcoming book, pre-order it, get into proximity with this powerhouse, enter her world. So, Brandy, thank you so much for being here.
Ellie, thank you so much for having me. I just adore you. You are such a beautiful being. So thank you.
Thank you. Till next time.